Good afternoon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Up and Out, our program at Prince George's County Memorial Library System that is for teens who are LGBTQ plus and their allies to learn about the wisdom that our community partners have. My name is Rebecca Oxley. I am the librarian 3 at the Greenbelt Branch. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am thrilled to introduce our guest for today, Cooper Lee Kidd. Their pronouns are they and them. Cooper is a graduate student at the University of Maryland, College Park, right here in Prince George's County, and they are studying data science and analytics. They are also a graduate assistant in leadership development at the UMD LGBT Equity Center. They work closely with other LGBT people and allies in their role at the Equity Center. Most recently, they led a panel discussion on data utilization within the LGBTQ plus community. Cooper is also a research assistant at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or CHOP. They work with LGBTQ plus youth at risk for HIV. At CHOP Cooper, they analyze risk for STIs. Previously, Cooper worked at Swarthmore College, working with LGBTQ plus students. And Cooper has a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland, College Park. Hi, Cooper. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I am super great and really excited to have you here. I wanted to get started just to let our teens know more about, since the University of Maryland College Park is this, huge, great institution that we have right here in the county. I wanted to know, what does the UMD LGBT Equity Center do?
Sure. And that's a great question. So the UMD LGBT Equity Center is a center on the University of Maryland's campus. Currently, because of the pandemic, we are remote, but in normal times, we're located in Marie Mount Hall. If you look at a map of the campus, it's kind of next to a building that is the chapel. It looks like a chapel, so you'll probably be able to tell where it is. And the Equity Center essentially provides help for students. It provides a variety of resources. There's a variety of student groups that are under the Equity Center. There's groups for LGBT students overall. There's groups specific to trans students. There's a group for asexual identified folks and other demographics of the LGBT community. The Equity Center also puts on programming for LGBTQ plus identified students and allies. You mentioned that we had a data science panel. So that's like an example of one of the events that the Equity Center hosts. We have a variety of different events. We have a website. I believe it's lgbt.umd.edu. And that website gives you more up-to-date information on the programs that the Equity Center is hosting and does. A variety of different programs have been offered this semester because of the pandemic. Most of the programming is offered online. So it is a great resource for students. And there are staff members who are more than willing to help students and meet with folks as well.
That sounds marvelous. We did not have anything like that when I was an undergraduate. I wanted to know a little bit more about the LGBT Equity Center. What exactly is the mission there?
Sure. So I am not exactly 100% sure what the mission of the LGBT Equity Center is, but I believe it's somewhere along the lines of supporting LGBTQ plus students on the University of Maryland campus. Again, there's a website. You can probably find the exact wording of the mission there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What kinds of things or projects do you tackle in your specific role at the Equity Center?
Sure. So I'm a graduate assistant. So this semester I worked on the data utilization panel. We had 4 different panelists from a variety of different industries talk about how they utilize data or information in their roles as queer people in the workforce. I am also currently working on, we have an honor society for LGBTQ plus identified students. It's the Lavender Leadership Honor Society. So I've been working on some administrative stuff for that And in the fall, I'm teaching a course called LGBT 350, LGBT People and Communication at the University of Maryland, which is offered through the Women and Gender Studies Department. So I've also been preparing for that.
Wow, that's very exciting news.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, because I see that you have a lot of experience at different universities, both as a student and as a leader. How does University of Maryland or some of the other large universities you've had experience with support LGBTQ plus students in your experience?
Sure. So I'll start with the University of Maryland because it's where I currently am. I think that large universities have a large, they have a lot of resources that they can offer students, right? We have a variety of different resources on campus. So there's like a counseling center, a health center, and they're all kind of separate, right? And we work as part of an integrated team, right? And so part of what that means is that if students are having like a mental health crisis, we would refer them to like the counseling center or maybe the health center, depending on the circumstance, right? And I think that large universities are uniquely positioned to do this because there are so many resources for students, right? And not all of those resources live under the Equity Center itself, right? I think there's also, because there are so many students, there's a lot of different groups for students. I recently learned there's a group for people who identify as queer and Christian that is at the University of Maryland. And they're not directly under the LGBT Equity Center, but they do exist. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration because it's so large, and there's also a lot of opportunity to meet people who folks may not normally meet. I went to a high school that was much smaller than the University of Maryland, so there were a lot less students, and because of that, I think that a lot of students when I came to Maryland, I was very surprised at like the amount of programming that they were able to offer. And also just having an equity center, I think, is something that's unique to large universities, although smaller universities at this point have had the opportunity to build similar things. So for example, I worked at Swarthmore College, and they don't have an LGBT equity center per se. Their LGBT student programming is under the president's office, which is the same as at Maryland, but it's part of what they call an intercultural center. So it's a center that focuses on LGBTQ plus students, Indigenous students, students of color. And so it was more of like a intersectional center, whereas Maryland has different centers that all kind of work together, right? So there are different groups and centers that offer similar but not the same. And I think it's actually a cool opportunity at Maryland to be involved with it because of the amount of differentiation between these centers.
That's great to hear. I really applaud the University of Maryland for giving so many avenues for students to create spaces for themselves. I think that's really wonderful. You know, as a librarian, I am, of course, a little fixated on libraries and wondering how the UMD library system specifically makes space for LGBTQ plus students, if at all.
Sure. Yeah, so I actually worked at the University of Maryland Library as an undergraduate. I worked in the archives, and I also worked at the Keldon Library, which is the largest library on the University of Maryland campus. If you've ever been to the University of Maryland, there's like this mall. It's basically a large patch of grass, and then there's some large building at one end, and that is the library. I think that the University of Maryland overall does a pretty good job of supporting LGBTQ plus students. And I think the library kind of falls into that broader category as well. When I was a student at the library, my pronouns were always respected. Nobody asked inappropriate questions. I worked at, the front desk of the large library, and I just felt very like seen, and in a good way. My coworkers were very supportive. And there are a lot of resources for LGBTQ plus study within the library. They have a bunch of databases that you can go and look up different studies. There's a variety of different resources. I don't know if this is true in the middle of the pandemic, but when I worked there, they got a bunch of new books a week, and a lot of them did pertain to LGBTQ plus topics, which is actually really cool. Because that was something that I had not seen before. My public library didn't have a lot of LGBTQ plus books, so it was nice to see that at the University of Maryland. And And I just think that the library overall, for me as an undergrad, was a safe space. It was a space that I worked and also a space that I utilized often as a student. I did a lot of my studying in the library, and I always felt like it was a space where nobody was going to question like who I was. And it was also just, a very nice place to work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the library as sanctuary. And as a former University of Maryland student myself, I went there for graduate school to get my MLS way back in 2012. And I loved McKeldin Library. It's a great place. Go and pat Testudo on the head for luck when you have your exams. So,
and offer him your stuff, I guess, is another thing that people do.
Yes, you have to make sacrifices.
Yes.
So you worked in a library in your undergrad. Are you generally just a fan of libraries?
I do really like libraries. I actually have been reminiscing recently because of the lack of library spaces in the pandemic. Working and living in the same location has not been super great for me personally, and I think that libraries actually offer a great space for like sanctuary. So yeah, I am a fan of libraries.
That's wonderful. If you feel comfortable discussing this, would you mind telling me more about your personal experience as an LGBTQ plus UMD student?
Sure. Yeah. So I identify as genderqueer. I use they, them pronouns. My experience as an undergrad at Maryland is very different from my experience as a graduate student. So I actually started graduate school at the University of Maryland in the middle of a pandemic. So I have not really been on the University of Maryland campus all that much in the past year. I started in August. Nothing is really happening in person at this point. So I'll speak to my experience as an undergrad. So as an undergrad, I was pretty involved with the LGBTQ plus community at the university. A lot of my friends were part of the LGBTQ plus community. I was involved with a variety of clubs, and I think that's where I met the majority of my friends. And I'm not really 100% sure how I know some of these folks I didn't necessarily meet through LGBTQ plus stuff, but I just kind of met them through like existing as a queer student. And I think that was really nice. And it was just a really like nice overall experience. The university has taken great strides in the past couple of years to like add pronouns to like what they call ELMS, which is essentially like a database of students. Basically, if you're enrolled in a class, you get access to this website and it tells you like when things are due. And they've taken a lot of strides in the past couple of years to, add pronouns and to be overall more inclusive. And as a student, they did these LGBT trainings. I forget exactly what they were called, but just going to those trainings and learning more about the strides that the university was taking was actually very helpful. It made me feel seen as a student, and it made me feel like I was a student and also that I could also exist as a queer person. And just coming back to Maryland and working as a grad student at the Equity Center has been really nice. It's been a nice way to interface with people in the middle of a pandemic and meet other folks who identify as LGBTQ plus.
That's awesome. Let's see. I wanted to ask you about what are some of the best programs and groups at University of Maryland for LGBTQ plus students?
Yeah, so I think that this is like super arbitrary and dependent on like who you are and what you're looking for. Again, there are a lot of student organizations. I think that for me as an undergrad, I was involved with the group for students who identify as asexual or ACE, however you would prefer to refer to that. There's also a group called Trans U, which is a group of trans students at the University of Maryland. So those were two groups I was heavily involved in as an undergrad. There are also other groups. I don't exactly know their particular titles. They may have changed over the years, but I know that there's a group for LGBTQ plus students and allies in public health. So I guess if you're a public health student or just overall interested in health care or health equity or things of that nature, you may want to join that group. So I think there's like a different group for almost anyone at Maryland. And I think that there are also groups for people, the groups are supportive of people in all stages of LGBTQ plusness, right? When I was an undergrad, one of my friends was coming out, and I think that she found support and solace in certain groups more so than others. So I think it's just really dependent on the space that you're in as a student.
For sure. Can you comment, I know you brought up healthcare, on how it is getting proper healthcare as an LGBTQ plus university student? I know that's something that's a big concern for me.
Yeah, definitely. So I think healthcare, again, there's a health center at the University of Maryland. I do know they offer trans care. I do also know that they're pretty trauma informed, and there's a lot of work that they have done in the past couple of years. I think getting healthcare is pretty easy. I think it's a requirement that all students have health insurance, be it through the university or through somewhere else. And I think because of that, it's pretty easy to get healthcare. I can't speak to how the experience is currently, but when I was an undergraduate and needed healthcare, I was always able to easily make an appointment on the website. I always was seen pretty quickly. And as a queer person, I was always respected. My pronouns were used and things of that nature, my name. And I think that was really helpful. And there's also a counseling center. Counseling kind of falls under healthcare, I think. So the counseling center has groups for LGBTQ plus identified students specifically. And I think they have what they call like a rainbow drop-in hour. Although the name may have changed, for students who want like a one and done like counseling appointment. It's not like to get a therapist. It's kind of like one-time care. So if you had like an issue, you could go to them. And they offer that. Although I'm not 100% sure that service is being offered now. I think a lot of things have changed because of the pandemic. And also I graduated from the university in 2017 and I came back in 2020. So things changed in 3 years. So who knows?
Would you say that mental health, access to mental health services is a really important sticking point, particularly for LGBTQ plus students and applicants?
What do you mean by sticking point?
Like, how important is it when, if let's say I'm a teenager and I'm looking for a college that I think might be right for me, do we think that it's mental health access is really an important point to consider when you're considering university?
So I think mental health is something that should be considered when you're considering a university. I think that oftentimes it's one of those things that's overlooked. I think people, when I vaguely remember looking at colleges, people are very obsessed with the dorm situation. If there was like a private bathroom, I do remember that. And I think that sometimes things are overlooked. I think mental health care can be part of it. I also think that for me as an undergraduate, so I grew up in Montgomery County. So I think as an undergraduate, a lot of my healthcare was still through physicians and mental health practitioners who I had seen throughout high school. So I don't necessarily think that I looked at mental health care as much as someone who may come from a long distance or may not want to see the same people. And I think that it is important to know that there is health care and mental health resources where you're going. Yeah, I think that that's really important.
I would tend to agree. As a LGBTQ plus student at the University of Maryland myself, I found that their mental health services were very accessible and very, very helpful. They have a number of wellness initiatives when I was there, and I'm sure they probably still do quite a lot of that. Let's see. I want to ask you the question that most students want to know. What do LGBTQ plus students like yourself do for fun?
Yeah, sure. So I will admit my life is pretty boring in like a general sense. I think my life has gotten a little bit more boring in the pandemic. So my life, like what I do for fun, I do a lot of outdoor activities. I rock climb, I hike, I ski during the winter months. I went ice climbing last year, which is pretty cool. Yeah, in Montana. So I do a lot of stuff like that. I'm not someone who like super is like into going out or like, partying. I like do not know where people party at the University of Maryland, to be completely honest. I'm sure there are locations for that. I just am completely unaware of them. So a lot of my fun activities are just outdoor activities, stuff I do with friends. I bike a lot with friends. I hang out with my friends. I do a lot of board games and things like that. Um, I'm also very introverted, so I don't spend a ton of time with people. I kind of recharge and then go back to spending time with people. So I do a lot of like stuff that is more just for myself than for anyone else. I'm big on the self-care bandwagon.
All
So I
right.
do like a lot of like reading and, things like that. Yeah.
That's great. So there's so much there in that answer that I want to touch on because I think that social life outside of your academic duties is really important to consider when you are assessing universities and colleges. One thing that I think it's important for our teens to know is that there is such a emphasis that our culture places on partying or consuming alcohol or being intoxicated. And there are so many other ways to have fun when you're sober than to just go over to Looney's to get a few drinks and dance around a little bit. I know College Park is a great college town because they have a wonderful comic book store. They have lots of great places to eat that are within walking distance. I know that there is a board game bar type of place where you can just like play board games and have a cocktail or a mocktail with your friends. And then, of course, as you mentioned, a lot of outdoor activities in this region in general. It's really beautiful. I went for a walk with a friend about 2 weeks ago just to see the spring flowers that were all over the campus. And we found all kinds of little like hidden goodies in the woods and things like that. So I really appreciate that you spoke to that. Let me ask you something though, because we are, right now we're in the pandemic, so everything's on hold. But in the before times, Pride in DC is popping. I don't know if you've ever been or have friends who go.
To DC in general?
Yeah, to DC for Pride celebrations.
Oh, for Pride. Oh, yes. I love DC Pride, actually. So, yes. I do a lot of, I go, and I also have a lot of friends who go. And it's normally just like fun to walk around. You can also get a lot of free stuff. I'm a grad student, and before I was a grad student, I'm very cheap. I get the majority of my pens from Pride.
Nice.
Yeah.
I also go to Pride every year faithfully. I love the Pride situation in DC. The parade is so much fun. There's just so many wonderful young people walking around just existing and being fabulous. And then there's the like the festival the next day where they have all kinds of booths and different vendors that are set up. It's a really great time.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think that Pride is an awesome experience in DC, especially because it's not so large that you feel like you're lost.
Yeah, for sure. But it is like popping. Like
yes, it is very nice. Yeah.
There's a lot going on from daybreak to sunset. So and also for any of the teens listening out there, Annapolis has been doing a Pride festival for the past couple of years. I believe that they're postponing this year's festivities until October just to be on the safe side. But that's another option because Annapolis is not too far if you have a friend who has a car. So thanks for sharing that.
No worries.
Are there any resources that you would specifically recommend to UMD students who are LGBTQ plus?
I think that the Equity Center is a great place to start to get connected. In non-pandemic, we're open, and there's like there's a bunch of couches and seating areas. There's a library. It can just be nice to sit there and do homework and talk to people. So I think that's a great place. I think going to events that are catered to queer students can be a nice place to meet people. I think as with any college experience, like getting to know people is part of the fun and also part of the experience. So I think just, making friends, like you can join an organization and realize that the organization is not right for you, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't make friends in the organization and kind of have fun with them outside of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like a really nice environment, the Equity Center. Sounds very, very comfortable. And, you mentioned that you were a reader and that they had really good new books coming in to the McKeldin Library that, were queer related or queer adjacent. In terms of like, if you're just a fiction reader, can you get good queer books at the McKeldin Library to read for fun?
I think so. So actually, Maryland has a large College of Education, and I'm pretty sure that the College of Education has like a section of like young adult novels in the library that you can check out. So they may not be geared towards like an adult reader. I am not really sure who would qualify themselves as a young adult, but there are those books, and I think there are also LGBT/queer books that exist in the library.
Very cool. That's always very affirming to hear. I wanted to ask you about something. We did a campaign last year for Pride where we had our staff members do It Gets Better videos. For anybody who hasn't ever seen those, you can go on YouTube and look up It Gets Better. And it's a whole project where they have really accomplished and notable queer folks who are newly out of adolescence or a little bit older come and talk to younger people about what it's like to struggle in adolescence with your queerness, and then how things sort of start to resolve themselves and blossom so that you can thrive during your 20s. Did you have any kind of story that you wanted to share with our teens?
Yeah, so I think that my coming out experience is a little bit different from like most typical coming out videos that I've seen. My coming out experience is actually very nice. My family is very supportive. But I do think that, if you are struggling or you're unsure of your sexuality and or gender expression or however you would like to refer to that, I think it is really important to know that there are other queer people, there are queer adults, there are trans adults, and that a lot of people who identify as LGBTQ plus are doing very well, right? And I don't think that it's this. I think that some people have this idea that queer adults like don't exist, or that it's hard to be a queer adult, right? And I think that there are challenges with every identity. And we've seen some of this like play out recently in the news. But I also think that there's like power in being authentically yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's great advice for our teens. We appreciate that. I know that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. What is the Equity Center doing around that, or do you have any irons in the fire for that topic?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that the Equity Center is doing anything specific to that. I know that we're having a couple of healing spaces. So I guess if you were a sexual assault survivor or currently dealing with sexual assault in any way, those might be events for you to go to. I think, again, the counseling center might be a really good resource. Just having someone to talk to is really helpful in a variety of different circumstances. And there are a bunch of sexual assault hotlines that I believe folks can call as well. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that they exist. And the University of Maryland actually has I don't know if it's a division of the health center or if it's somewhere within the health center. And they do a lot of work with sexual assault that I believe is pretty gender inclusive.
That's really wonderful to hear. Let's see. Any final parting words for our teens? Any advice, or make sure you do this or don't miss out on that?
I don't have any like advice. I think that it's just awesome to be like queer. I think there's a lot of great things involved in that, and I think that it's something that's like I don't know. I often say that being queer is like my superpower, right? And I actually like think that that's like something important to like uplift, right? That it's not like this sad experience and I live a depressed existence or something. That my life is actually like very full.
That's really, really nice to hear. And I'm so happy for you. You obviously are thriving, and that's just fantastic. So thank you so much for taking time to share yourself with us and talk to us about the different resources that are available at University of Maryland in the LGBT Equity Center.
Yeah, no worries.
Do you have any time in case we want to open this up for questions for people to ask some questions?
Sure.
We are broadcasting on a number of platforms, so we'll see if we get any Q&A from. So are there any TV shows or movies that you're super excited about that are coming out? I know I have a couple that I'm dying about.
TV and movies. I got really into the HBO generation. I know that a lot of people don't like it. It's a TV show about queer students in high school, and I actually think it's very funny. I watched some new Netflix film, like True Force or something. It was about these best friends who were estranged and they became friends again, and this woman like accidentally injected herself with like superpower serum, and it's actually like very funny.
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. I love those two actresses. I think one is it Octavia Butler, who's one of the actresses?
I have no idea who's in it. I just found it hilarious, honestly.
Oh, we have a question. Did you mention that there is a library within the Equity Center? If so, they'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so there is a library in the LGBT Equity Center. I'm not exactly sure how one would go about checking out books, but it does exist, and there are quite a number of books. And this actually might answer your previous question. There are a lot of books that are, because it's the Equity Center, right? There are a lot of books that are like queer specific. So this actually might be a good place to look for queer specific nonfiction or fiction books.
That's great. Awesome. Let's see. If we don't have any more questions, do you have any parting words or a book recommendation? Actually, I would love to ask you, what was your favorite queer book that you read when you were a teen?
I don't think I have a favorite queer book from when I was a teen. I don't really recall books I read all that often very well. I recently read a book about somebody named Felix. I'm not exactly sure what the book is called.
Felix Ever After?
That could be it. It was about a queer person named Felix. So probably. It's like a young adult book. It was actually very good.
Wonderful. Again, another question about the library. Is it more research oriented or for casual reading?
So I believe that the LGBT Equity Center library is pretty much like any and all books. I don't think it's like specific for research or casual reading. I think that you could probably find a variety.
Very cool. Well, Cooper, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy graduate schedule to come and talk to us. You are a wonderful inspiration for our teens, and we hope that we'll hear great things from you going forward.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.